Okay, is anybody here? Stream health, what does that mean? Your viewers are happy, your viewers may be experiencing minor issues. Ooh. Oh, wow. Way, somebody here. Melanie Chapman, hello. Can you hear me okay? So this is the first time I've live streamed, so I've no idea whether this is going to be working. And Fatman, hello, and Nigel Wyman, hello. Can anybody confirm whether they can actually hear me? Yay, great. Good. YouTube is saying that the stream health is just okay and not good. A bit low volume. Okay, let's see if I can turn that up. Okay, how about that? Is that a better volume? Vipple my nipple. Stuart Edwards, yes, great. Okay, good. People. Well, hey. Fantastic. Good, good, good. So, yeah, well, I'll just let me just give it a minute for a few more people to turn up. Like I said, this is the first stream, and because it's not yet on a known channel yet, so I realised that I should probably put this on its own channel and set that up yesterday evening. Considering this idea was only kind of born less than 48 hours ago, and submitted it to YouTube to enable live streaming, and they said 24 hours. So, and that was kind of about 23 hours ago. So that's why this is on this channel for now. So don't bother subscribing to this channel, but there is the Cryptocurrency Explained channel, and I'll tweet that out if you haven't already found it. I'll tweet that out, and people can see that. So one of the things I will try and do is just try and find, if I can, no, I'll go without it. So the point of this channel, so the idea behind this concept is to talk about cryptocurrencies, and in particular XRP. So there's a lot of videos out there, there's a lot of channels out there that talk about cryptocurrency in terms of investment, in terms about price, in terms of news, and talk about what's coming up and that sort of thing. But there doesn't seem to be any channels, especially not in this sort of live format, that talk about the technicalities behind it. How does some of this stuff work? Not just with XRP, but in a wider sense. How do cryptocurrencies work? What do they do? What is a blockchain? What are cryptographic signatures? So it might be that you've invested in some cryptocurrencies, you've invested in XRP, that's all great. You're at a family barbecue or dinner or something like that. Nephew, uncle, whatever, aunt says to you, so this XRP, what is it then? And you say, well, it's a digital currency. It's going to take over the world. People are going to use it for exchanging and moving value around. They say, well, okay, well, that's great, but how does it work? And then you might be stuck. Something to do with blockchain and blocks and signatures and cryptography. So the idea behind this channel is to try and explain some of those bits and pieces, to talk about some of the technicalities, some of the technical aspects of how XRP works, how cryptocurrencies work, and kind of go from there and hopefully just build up people's knowledge a bit. How does that sound? Good? Anybody still here? hopefully. I can see the live chat here, so I'm hoping people are still here. If you are, say something on the live chat, just so that I know. Like I said, this is the first time I've done a live stream this format, so a little bit nervous. Great, good, okay. I've got no idea what the delay is either, so I don't know how long it takes before what I say you get into it. Let's go into the Trolls Cave again. Loved it. That the Trolls Cave. So that was a reference to that. Kind of partly sparked this idea. There's a video. You'll see it on this channel. It contains a lot of swearing. It contains me slightly losing my cool. But I got invited into a audio chat room with a bunch of Bitcoin supporters. And they basically sort of challenged me on Twitter and said, well, let's talk about this. Come on the microphone and let's talk. So I went on to talk with them, and things got pretty heated, shall we say. And I was trying to explain certain things to them, and it was towards the end of the day. I was getting quite snarky, I'll say that. But it was interesting. And the thing was that we were trying to get to the nuts and bolts of what cryptocurrency does, and it took a while. I don't think we really got there with some of them. I think there was a kind of a glossing over that they thought they understood certain bits and some things they did do, but I think they missed the point of some of it. I've been having a very, very, very long, very in-depth discussion on Twitter today. Some of you might have seen in amongst some of the other XRP supporters talking about control. And what control, for instance, do Ripple have over various aspects of XRP, which is a whole other topic that I want to get into, not on this first chat. But it is an area I want to talk about, because there is some technical elements to that hopefully I can try and explain, and hopefully that will help people. So, some more people, XRP Clothing. Thank you very much for coming along. This is good. So I thought we'd start with, what is a blockchain anyway? Some people may know this, some people may understand it, some people may not do. But I did a video a little while back entitled, Is XRP a Blockchain? Because there's certain people, die-hard cryptocurrency people, who they claim that XRP is not a blockchain. And I claim that it is. And I did a video to kind of explain a bit about that. And that video is what I'm going to try and base this material on today. Now, I was hoping to have something a little bit more prepared, as this video has only just come about pretty live. I've not had a chance to, and I've literally just run in from next door, having brushed my daughter's hair after her bath and getting her into bed. So things have been a little bit rushed, trying to get things going. Hopefully we'll build on this and be a bit more prepared in future talks. So what is a blockchain? Well, let me try and see if I can bring up. So hopefully, yes, this should automatically switch over. So, and if I go to I'm going to bring up the video that I did. He said, hopefully find it. Yes, is the XRP ledger a blockchain? So I'm going to bring up the video. Just mute myself talking there. And I will kind of run through this in a little bit more detail, and hopefully with a chance for people to kind of ask a few questions kind of as we go along. And then we can have a bit more of a discussion afterwards. The general format I want to do with these shows, hopefully, is sort of 10 minutes of talking about a topic and then some, more time for general discussion, so that people get the first sort of meat of it in 10 minutes if they want, and then they can go off if they want thereafter. Obviously, we're already into 10 minutes now, but let's see how we get on. So, what is it that a blockchain does? What is a blockchain? So, a blockchain is a series of records. I've probably got here somewhere within here. I will hopefully have a diagram to show. No, none of this is updating. Great. Okay, here's a little bit here. whether or not you can see this or not on here. So, okay. A blockchain is there's a series of blocks, and each block is a record that contains a number of transactions. Each transaction will be something along the lines of, you know, Matt paid Anne 20 XRP. And going on in the background here of this video, you can see these ledgers sort of updating live. I can actually show you this here. This is actually pretty cool. GateHub Live. And you can see here live transactions going through. So each time this refreshes, this is a new block, or in the terms of Ripple, the terms of XRP Ledger, this is a ledger, and each one of these lines is a transaction. And so you can see there's 5,000 XRP there paid from one account to another. There's some Ethereum, some other currencies in here. There's trades going on. There'll be some payment requests, payments. There's a payment there. There's several different transactions that can happen on the XRP ledger. So each block contains a number of these transactions, and then each block is then cryptographically signed. A signature is taken of it. If you think of it a bit like, you know, the signature verifying, you know, the bottom of a paper ledger. You have a bunch of stuff in there, and then at the bottom you write a signature, maybe put a seal, a stamp on it that says, you know, I verify this is all correct. So a cryptographic signature does exactly that, but the point being is that you can't change anything without affecting the signature. So you could tell if it's ever been tampered with. So you have one block of a number of transactions. You then take that signature and you then include it in the next block. So that's what this diagram up here is trying to show. It's unfortunately, like I said, it is very small here, but each block contains the next transaction as you go along. And so eventually you get a stage where you couldn't ever alter any one transaction, because that would alter the signature, and that signature is included in the next block, which would alter that block, which would then mean the signature of the next block changes, and you have this cascading effect. This is the chain. You can't break any one link in the chain without the whole thing sort of falling apart. And that's kind of the main point of a blockchain. Is it's an immutable, an unchangeable, a non-tamperable, a tamper-proof record of transactions. So you can look back in time and you could say, 1 year ago, Alice paid Bob. And you can see that happened, and nobody could go back and say, well, Alice didn't pay Bob then, because there's all these records subsequently, and if that one record ever got falsified, then everything else would change from then on. So that's what a blockchain is. In its purest, simplest form, it is just a series of records. Hopefully that makes sense to some people. Oh, cool, some more people here. Curtis Barlow, tearing it up for the XRP community. When's the $10 party in Bristol? Yes, $10 party in Bristol, that would be good. I live in Bristol, so I'd quite like a $10 party somewhere else would be fantastic. I love Bristol, but if I'm going to have a $10 party, I'm gonna want to go somewhere exotic or whatever. So back to the blockchain, series of records. This is the same on Bitcoin, and this is the same on the XRP ledger. It's the same on most blockchains. Follow this same pattern, that you have these series of records or series of blocks, and each one builds on the other. Tom Custer asking, why is it a problem? Why is what a problem? Having a party in Bristol, or is there something else I've missed there? And hello, Andreas. Don't worry about being late. I'm sort of talking about blockchains at the moment. It has to be immutable. Why is that? Okay, so the point of the blockchain being is that you can't go back and change a previous transaction. If you have a centralized database, say a database in a bank, that's how most ledgers currently work at the moment, bank ledgers. So there'll be a centralized database sat on a computer in the middle of whatever, Lloyds Bank, NatWest Bank, the bank that you go and deposit money into and withdraw from an ATM, there will be a computer somewhere, a server that has a database. And in that database will be a record, and it says Matt has £100 in his bank account, $100, €100, whatever it might be. And when I spend something, it takes it out of that record. So if I spend £20, it takes £20 off, and it says Matt now has £80 in his account. It takes another £10 off. Now Matt now has £70 in his bank account. That's all fine. That's all reliant upon that one central database. So what happens if there's a bug in that database, or someone maliciously goes in, gets in there, changes the record and says, actually, Matt doesn't have £100. Matt now has £10 or £0 or minus £1,000. Somebody could make that change and there would not necessarily be any record of it. I'm simplifying. Bank databases have additional audit controls to kind of prevent that sort of thing. But you could make a change to that record. With a blockchain, this ledger is replicated amongst a whole bunch of computers, a whole bunch of nodes, as they're often called, on the network. So on XRP at the moment, on the XRP ledger, there are 700 or something nodes on the network. You can have a look and see on the network topology. This site's good if you've not been to it before. xrpcharts.ripple.com gives you an idea about what's going on. It may load a bit slowly with the live stream going on, but it should come up and say in a bit how many nodes there are in total on the network. It's, I think, something around about 700 at the moment, nodes on the network. And it looks like it's not going to load for me. So each one of those nodes has a complete copy of the ledger. So if somebody were to go in and falsify one record, they'd really have to falsify it on 700 different computers around the world, run by different people in different countries, in different data centers, in somebody's bedroom, in the equivalent of Fort Knox, all different places around the world. And they would have to change it everywhere, because if they change it on one, it's easily detectable. Because if you falsified it on one, it would break the chain going forward. Remember the signatures. As soon as you change one record, it changes the signature. And that then means that it would then be detectable, and anybody on any of the other ledgers would then see that that's not the same. Okay, this is starting to load now. So here we go. There's a whole list. All of these here are nodes on the Ripple network that are all have a copy of the ledger, and they're all connected in what's called a mesh network, which means they all sort of randomly connect to each other to form this kind of grid, and this would actually show. It's not showing it at the moment, it's not loaded, but it normally shows this big sort of spider of nodes and networks, and it shows you kind of how they all interconnect. And the point being is that there's no one central node. You could take any one of them down and the network would still keep going. It's a kind of a cooperative network that everything communicates together. So that's why it's the immutability bit comes into it. The fact that if you alter one record, it would break the chain of signatures going forward, and there's a number of other nodes that all have replicas of it, and they'd be able to easily see that something has been tampered with, and they could copy it back from the other ones and recover from that situation if need be. So a question from Tom Kussner: where does the trusted node list, the UNL, come into play? Okay, so this is getting a bit further into things. So I mentioned there's all these nodes, about 700 nodes here. And I've talked about how you have this series of blocks, this series of ledgers, and each one contains a number of transactions. One of the big problems with distributed systems is how do you deal with a situation where somebody tries to spend the same money twice. So if you remember when I said a centralized system, like a bank has a centralized database, when you go into a shop and you pay with your debit card, it withdraws that money. So I had £100 in my bank account, I go into a shop, and I pay with a card and it withdraws £10 and I have £90 in my bank. If I were to try and make that transaction twice in two different places at the same time, say I could run quickly with a card or I could do two online payments at the same time, one of those would hit the database first and then the other one would come out second, because there's one central database that's kind of the master of it. So if I had £100 in my bank account and I spend 80, I've got 20 left. If I then go somewhere else and try and spend 50, well, that would take me into minus 30. And if I don't have an overdraft, then the bank would say no. The bank wouldn't let me spend that money. I can't spend more money than I have in my bank account, assuming I haven't got an overdraft. So this central database is the bit that keeps control of everything and keeps control of what happens, what order transactions happen in. First one goes through. If you've spent all your money, the second one will fail. Now, the problem with blockchains and these distributed currencies, things like XRP and Bitcoin, Ethereum, they all have the same issue, is that because they are distributed and because they're decentralized, there's no one single central node, how do they agree that a transaction has happened in a certain order? Or how do they agree that you haven't spent money twice? If I was able to make a payment on an XRP ledger in the UK, connected to one of the servers in the UK, and I also did exactly the same connected to a server in Australia at the same time, they would both see my payment going through, and they might not communicate with each other quick enough to realise that I've actually spent that same money twice. So there has to be some way in which they can decide, they can prevent what's called the double spend problem. They prevent that same piece of money being spent twice. So how do they do that? With Bitcoin, I'm going to simplify greatly here. We might expand on this, well, we will expand on it in other subsequent episodes of this show. But simplifying greatly, what Bitcoin does is they effectively think of it as a lottery. And every 10 minutes, everybody competes for this lottery, and every 10 minutes one node is selected as the winner, and that node determines which transactions get put in that block. And then 10 minutes there's another lottery. This is what's called the proof of work. This is what miners do. Again, I'm going to cover this later because I'm really skimming over this. But just for the moment, really simplistically, you can think of it as being a lottery that happens every 10 minutes, and one node gets chosen, and that node decides which transactions go in. So that node will know you've spent your first set of money, you can't spend the second lot again because you'll go overdrawn. XRP and the XRP ledger does it differently. Rather than picking one node to be the kind of master for 10 minutes, XRP, this is the kind of the brilliance of what David Schwartz, was the chief cryptographer at Ripple, is now their chief technical officer, one of the main architects of the XRP ledger. What he came up with is he realized that if all of the nodes can agree an order in which the transactions happened, then it becomes very simple. The first transaction goes through, the second transaction would fail if you've spent all your money by the first transaction. So as long as you can agree an order, then the double spend problem goes away, right? First transaction goes through, second transaction would be the one that would fail. So how do you agree an order? This is what this bit, the unique nodes list, comes into play. So of this list of 700 odd nodes, there is a smaller subset of that called validators. And these validators, again, this list may or may not show. Yeah, it's taken a while to load from here, I think, because the live stream is having a few problems. This list of validators, we'll leave this and it might load in a bit. This list of validators is a subset of those nodes. So of the 700 or so nodes, there are about, I think it's about 200 that are validators, or between 100 and 200 that are validators, I think, at the moment. And what happens is each node picks a certain number of them, and they vote between themselves on a proposed set of transactions and the order in which they happen. And they then try and agree between them cooperatively what order the transactions happen in. I will go over this in another episode in more detail. I'm kind of skimming over this, partly for brevity, partly because the first episode and I haven't prepared enough material to actually demonstrate it to you probably and explain it effectively. But the point being is that the unique node list is a set of nodes that you trust to come to an agreement on the order of transactions. Now, what's interesting with this is that you don't have to actually trust those individual nodes. All you have to do is trust that they will try and come to an agreement on the order. So it doesn't matter what the order is. All it matters is that you actually agree one consistent version of the truth. And that is what the consensus protocol does. That is the main key innovation behind the XRP ledger. So that consensus protocol is what helps all these nodes agree, and the unique node list is the list that each server defines of which nodes it listens to for that consensus agreement. Another way to explain this is think about a trial in a courtroom. Imagine you have got, something's happened, a murder has happened, somebody has been killed, and you are the investigator, prosecutor, whatever. You are trying to establish what happened in the case. You know, what were the events that happened that led to the murder? And you've got 100 witnesses that saw what happened. You can go and ask, you don't have to ask 100 witnesses what happened. You could pick out, say, 10 witnesses. Now, if you pick out 10 witnesses and ask each one of them, okay, what happened? And they all say, Charlie killed Derek with a spade. Then you can be fairly confident that that's probably what happened. Because you've picked 10 people, possibly randomly out of 100, and they've all said the same thing. So you can probably gather that that's right. You don't have to ask 100 people. You can ask a number of them. Now you could say, well, what if those 10 people had agreed to collude? Those 10 people got together and they said, we're gonna set Charlie up. We'll say Charlie did it and he killed Derek with a spade. Well, that's great, but those 10 people don't know that they are going to be the ones that are going to be asked. Out of that 100, I can ask any 10, and they won't actually know. Because in fact, I don't actually ask them. What I do is I get all 100 to write down what they think happened on a piece of paper and then hand it over to me. And of those 100 pieces of paper, I pick out 10 and I read them. So it could be any one of those 100 jurors, 10 jurors out of any one of those 100. And I look at that and I see. So they don't know, of those 100 jurors, they don't know themselves which ones are going to be listened to and which ones are not. So they have to be honest because they don't know who's listening to them. And if what actually happens is I actually pick 10 and I stick and I keep listening to those 10. And maybe on the next event that's happened, I ask them another question about what happened. Where did this event take place? Now, if all 10 of them come back and say the same location, again, it's probably right. What if one of those jurors that I keep asking, one of those witnesses, keeps coming back with a different answer? 9 of them say Charlie killed Derek with a spade, and one of them says Charlie shot Derek with a revolver. Well, I can probably guess that 9 versus 1, the 9 are probably right. I then ask, where did this happen? And the same 9 come to an agreement, and the same 9 say it happened at the lane at the back of the house. And the one who said the revolver says something different again. They say he got shot in the bedroom. Well, you start to realise that one witness is unreliable. whenever you ask them, they're coming back with a different version of events to what everybody else is coming back with. So you can then disregard that witness. You can say, okay, we're not going to listen to them. They can still keep talking. They can still keep writing down what happened, but we're just going to ignore them. So that's kind of how it works. I've simplified a bit and glossed over, but as an analogy, yes, Tom, it is like Cluedo. Exactly. Where was Mr. Mustard? And who in the XRP community is Mr. Mustard? We could start a whole trivia here. Start a whole game going on. But that's kind of what happens, right? So I don't have to ask all 100 witnesses. Now, those 100 witnesses in this case are the 900 or 700 or whatever it is nodes all around the world, all of these nodes here. And it would just take too long to ask all of them. And they're spread all around the world, and some of them might be busy and whatever. So I don't need to ask all of them. I just have to pick a subset of them. And I try and choose a subset of them that I know are going to be reliable and that they're going to be available. When I ask them a question, they'll come back with an answer, or rather they'll be broadcasting, because yes, you're right, Nick, it's broadcasting. That's what they do. So they broadcast their answers the whole time, their view of events. But I know that they're going to be doing that continuously. So I know that they're going to be a reliable source in terms of they're going to be continually doing it. They're not going to suddenly just drop off the network half the time. But I can then, of that set of nodes that are broadcasting, all I need to make sure is that I've got a reasonable confidence that they're not going to collude. So if I've picked 10 out of 100 in random, then that's probably a good thing. But what I can actually do is I can actually say, okay, I'm going to pick some in this country, some in this country, some in this country, some in this country. Or some by this organisation, some by this organisation, some by this organisation. Because I know there's no reason why those two organisations would want to collude. There's nothing in it for them. They're not going to gain anything by doing so. So there's no impetus for them to do so. And if they did collude, and again, if they did start coming back continuously with an answer that is unreliable, I was hoping this would load, because this valid data registry here shows you an agreement and a disagreement. It shows you how often nodes are in agreement. There's another. What's the other scan? There's another site called Ripple Scan. Let's see if this one will work any better. Ripple Scan. Here we go. Nodes. Okay, I thought this had the validators on. It doesn't. But this is another list of nodes and shows you where they all are. Countries are in Germany, United States, Canada, Luxembourg, South Africa, Singapore. So again, we try to pick nodes that would not collude, and that's what the unique node list is. So the unique node list is I choose on the if I run a node on the XRP ledger, I would select a set of servers that I don't think are going to collude. And the way I kind of explain this often for people is, if I picked 4 organizations, I pick Apple, Microsoft, the Linux Foundation, and whatever, somebody else, the World Bank, right? The chances are those 4 organizations are all so different that they probably wouldn't come to an agreement to collude. I might not necessarily trust all of them, necessarily, but I can trust that they're probably never going to agree to collude. So Tom's asking, so the risk of 51% attacks with Bitcoin. So with Bitcoin, what happens, when I mentioned there's this kind of lottery that happens and that they pick a winner, there's a scenario in which if over 51% of the participants in that lottery are controlled by one organization, that they can control what happens. They can game the system, in effect. Again, glossing over majorly here, but if over 51%, they could game the system. With the XRP ledger, it needs to be 80% in order for that similar sort of thing to happen. And with Bitcoin, the way as a operator on Bitcoin, I don't get to choose. I have no say in who's going to win that lottery. That lottery actually is chosen effectively in proportion to who has the most electrical power. That's where, again, simplifying a bit, Bitcoin uses a process called mining. Mining is a very computationally expensive process. It requires a lot of electrical power to run. So this is why there's a lot of concentration in areas that have cheap electrical power. So China, for instance, etc. So, but you don't have a say in who's going to win that. Whoever has the most electrical power is going to win. So if somebody has control of 51% of the lottery tickets that have been bought, for example, then there's a greater chance that they're going to win the lottery. With XRP, that's not the case, because you choose who you want to listen to. So those 100 jurors or witnesses, you picked 10, and nobody can tell you which 10 to pick. You pick them. So actually, if there's a scenario, if there's a situation, if there's a problem, you can choose another 10. You can't do that with Bitcoin. I'll go on to this again, I think, later. Mark, load it for me quickly, so it must be your connection. Yes, it is my connection here. I actually think it's possibly something to do with a something I am running here. Let me just see if I can shut this 1 second. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, that might load again in a bit. I've got a process here that keeps running and checking the ledger, and one of Ripple's servers, it checks a bit too fast, and so it sometimes gets rate limited and stopped from loading. So where were we? Hopefully that might explain the process of a unique nodes list. I will go over this again another time and go into more detail on this. So hopefully running a validator from my PC. Unfortunately, I'm not running a validator from here. I do run my own node, though. It's not a validator node, but it will be on this list of nodes here somewhere. It's actually located in Germany, so it'll be on this list somewhere, on this list running. So how many XRP can we see have burned already? So with XRP, there were 100 billion XRP in existence at the start of what's called the Genesis ledger. There's 100 billion at the start, and those have been transferred around. A bunch of them got transferred to the original founders of the ledger. A bunch of them, about 80%, got transferred to Ripple, the company. They've then sold a bunch on. You know, you've bought some from somebody else, I bought some from somebody else. They've kind of dispersed around the world. But for every transaction, a very, very small amount gets burned. And you can see that. Where's a good place to see that? Actually, I think on Ripple's website, you can see that. I think here on Ripple's website, they have, possibly under market performance, I think. Okay, not quite, but we've got a bunch of numbers here. The total XRP held by Ripple, the total XRP distributed, and the total amount in escrow. If you took 100,000, 100 billion, and subtracted those three numbers, then you get an answer. Well, hey, we could do that if we wanted to. 100 billion. I think Google will let me do a calculation like this. Let's see what happens. This is probably one of those times when I realise I probably should have cleared my browser history. 8,099,518. So that's how many have been burnt in total. So every transaction, a small little bit of XRP has been destroyed, and it's about 8 million, or 8,099,000, so nearly 9 million. 9 million XRP have been destroyed out of that 100 billion. So really, really not a much. Sarah the happy little unicorn. Oh my goodness. That is my daughter. That is my 7-year-old daughter who should be asleep in bed right now. So excuse me for a second, but Sarah, it's bedtime. You've got school tomorrow. On the XRP chart, you can see the number is smaller. Yeah, you might be able to actually. On the XRP chart site, live chart on here, you might see ledger stats. Oh, total XRP. There we go. There's the number right there. So you can see that getting smaller. We would expect more to be burned at an exponential rate when XRP adoption picks up. Yes, you would do. So that all depends upon the number of transactions that occur each day. And so as the number of transactions go up, then yes, the amount of XRP burned would also go up. So that's the situation with that. So hopefully that's given people some idea. I've just realised I don't think the live chat that I've actually got on the screen is updating here. I've just realised that this live chat window that I've got on the screen, you can't see at all. So I'm actually looking at a chat here. There we go. But hopefully, obviously, you can see it yourself because you're chatting away. But yeah, that should be up there. Oh, gremlins of the first show. So any other questions? Like I said, it's been a very, very rapid going over things. I'm going to do a little more in-depth kind of later on in future episodes. Pick a particular topic, I suppose, and then go over it. Same chat. So can you actually see the chat that's showing on there? Maybe it's just my preview's not showing it. So there's nothing else to talk about. Would you mind explaining the amendment process? Okay, let me guess. You were on Twitter today and watching what was going on Twitter. Okay. First of all, I'll talk about the burn rate first, just quickly. Thunderbox, can the burn rate on the ledger be altered? Yes, it can do. The burn rate can be altered in the fact that the minimum fee can be increased. So at the moment, the minimum fee is 12 drops. A drop is a millionth of a XRP, and a millionth or 100,000th. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's either 100,000th or a millionth. It's a tiny fraction. And so that can be increased as necessary. It also dynamically increases as the load increases. So as more people are using the network, then that will increase again. So Tom, you see it on the right of your screen. Good. Well, that's the hope. Just for some reason in my preview here, I'm not seeing it. So on Twitter, there was a very in-depth conversation, and this is something that I do want to talk about in a later show because it does. I think it warrants a more in-depth chat. But the XRP ledger, I mentioned there's all these servers all across the globe, and there's a process called the amendment process, which means that changes to the ledger can be proposed and then sort of ratified by a vote. So if we look at, let's see here. If I look at here, Ripple amendments, one of the lists, known amendments is probably the one I wanted. Known amendments. Here we go. There's a number of amendments that have been made in the past. Some of these are fixes to various things. Some of them are improvements. So things like escrow. So the XRP ledger has the ability to escrow funds. So what that means is you can lock funds up and say these funds can only be released after a certain time or after a certain condition has been achieved. So Ripple themselves do this. They had a vast amount of XRP, 60 billion XRP, and that 60 billion they put 55 billion, I think it was, in rolling escrow contracts, 1 billion each, expiring every month. And so at the end of each month, 1 billion escrow gets returned to them that they can then spend if they want. In most cases, they're putting it back into the pile. But that escrow functionality was an amendment that was enabled on the 31st of March 2017, according to this little label here. And there's a number of different amendments that went through. Some of them have been vetoed in here. Some have been enabled. Some have not yet been enabled, have been planned. So what happens is an amendment can be proposed. Anybody on the network can propose an amendment, and the validators get a chance to vote on it. So they put within their config file or within the validator command, they can run something that basically says yay or nay for this particular bit of functionality. And there's a process where for 2 weeks there has to be a continual 80% or above agreement to that amendment. And if that happens, then the amendment is ratified, and then there's a certain period of time by which all the other nodes have to then claim to support that agreement, that amendment. If they don't, they get sort of locked out of the process, and then it goes on. So one example here is checks. So for those in the UK, that's checks as in CHEQUES. The things, piece of paper, you write down a number and a payee on. In Ripple's terms, they came up with an electronic equivalent of a check. So at the moment, if I want to make a payment, so Alice wants to pay Bob, on the XRP ledger, Alice says, pay Bob 100 XRP. And that goes through nearly instantly. Within 3 seconds, that goes through. With a check, Alice can say, I'm going to write a check for 100 XRP. Now I'm going to give that to Bob, and Bob can decide to cash it at some point in the future, or give it back to me, or destroy it, or it might expire. But they can choose to cash it or not. It's not an immediate payment. So it's actually quite useful for certain things. For example, many of you may have interacted with the XRP tip bot on Twitter. Again, I'll go into detail in another point, but there would be a really good thing that could be done with that using checks. In terms of, at the moment, you have to top up your account with the XRP tip bot initially by sending it some XRP or being tipped by somebody else. But you have to send it some XRP, which means it's holding on to your XRP. So the tip bot itself has a wallet with the sum total of everybody's XRP in it. Now, checks would allow you to actually write a bunch of checks, hand them to the tip bot and say, here's a bunch of checks. When you need them, cash them. But don't cash them until you need them. And that way, if something happened to the XRP tip bot, if it was ever compromised in any way, there wouldn't be a big bank account full of money. There'd be a number of checks, but whoever pinched them wouldn't be able to then cash those checks. So, Tom just sent you a tip using a tip bot a few minutes ago. Thank you very much, Tom. Yeah, well, I will put some information about tips later on, but I just wanted to get this show going before I pass the hat around. But yeah, so amendments are a process by adding additional functionality or fixing functionality, or even in some cases removing functionality at a later point in time. So these things can be voted on and brought in incrementally in time. So as you can see, they've all been enabled at different points. So some back in so fee escalation was in 2016, multi-signing was in 2016, escrow was in 2017. Deposit auths, checks, these are all planned for, some of these have been enabled, some planned for 2018. So at the moment, checks have not been approved. And what actually happened was Ripple wrote the check code. They put out effectively a vote on the system. An amendment was proposed to adopt this functionality of checks. And they didn't reach the 80% quorum needed to approve it. Not enough of the validators on the network agreed to approve it, so it never got adopted. They're going to try again at some point, no doubt, because it is actually good functionality, and I think people do want it. But at the time they proposed it, people didn't want it. I have to say, from me personally, coming from the UK, the idea of checks, I thought that's going backwards, surely, until I realised what they actually were. But the point being is that Ripple themselves tried to add functionality to the XRP Ledger network that was rejected by the wider community. And that's kind of the crux of the great long-running discussion I had on Twitter today, which is, do Ripple have control of the network? Do Ripple have control of the code base that runs for the code that runs the XRP Ledger network? And the reality is that yes, they do have control of their repository of code, but anybody else can take a copy of that and do what they want. And even though Ripple have control of that, as seen by the checks amendment, they don't have carte blanche still to do what they want. They proposed a proposal, an amendment, and it didn't get accepted. So Thunderbox is asking, why would you want to check to delay payment for 10 days? Yes, perhaps that's what you wanted to do. You don't want payment to go through necessarily straight away. You could use it in conjunction with something else. So there's a project called Codius that Ripple are working on, and Codius is a smart contract system. Again, a whole other topic. But smart contracts in essence are just small little bits of logic that can run on the network. So you might have a smart contract that says, every time this football team win a match, send one of these checks to this person. Now, you could say to them, just make a payment to this person, but that would mean that they would need the funds in their account. Whereas what could happen is Alice could write a check to Charlie, but give it to Bob for safekeeping. And Bob could be the one that decides whether or not to give Alice's check to Charlie, because Bob's an independent third party who can check the football scores. That's, a kind of a simple example. So yes, that kind of refutes Galgatron's argument that it'll be useful. Exactly. Galgatron was being devil's advocate for a lot of that. It was slightly confusing as to which bits he was being devil's advocate for at times. But indeed, Ripple does not control XRP, and I'm going to do a whole other show on topics like that. So we're doing well. Is a check an IOU? Not really, because a check actually, unlike a paper check, as far as I'm aware, I could be wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure, unlike a paper check, a check actually has the funds associated with it. So if I have 100 XRP in my account and I write a check for 10 XRP, I now only have 90 XRP available in my account. So when I write a check, those funds are effectively pre-booked. So it's not like an IOU, because I've already kind of allocated those funds, and if the person on the other end decides to cash the check, they will get those funds. You couldn't write a bad check. You couldn't write a rubber check and say, here's a check for 1 billion XRP, and then go off and watch them try and cash it. So a check would give temporary custodianship. Yes, in effect. I believe, I will double check this, but I believe it works along the same lines of effectively escrow, in that the funds are locked up. And I think the check can either be paid or it can be destroyed. And if it's destroyed, then it would the funds would be returned. And I think you might be able to have a good. I think you can have a expiry window. So XRP clothing. Thanks for coming by. Off to go see the Sacha Baron Cohen show. Well, that's a good point, actually. I said we'd try and run this show for an hour. Amazingly, I've been talking for nearly an hour. I didn't actually think had this dreaded feeling that I was going to start the show and nobody was going to turn up and I'd be standing here talking to myself. But this has been great, and the Sacha Baron Cohen show does look fantastic. So I don't blame people wanting to go off for it. So what I'll probably do is I'll wrap up shortly. But if there's a few more questions, then for the next couple of minutes. So ONG. Could you advise how Cobalt will work to increase transactions per second? So Cobalt is, I mentioned that there's this consensus algorithm that Ripple have. It's called something like the XRP consensus algorithm, I think is what it's called, XRP ledger consensus algorithm. That takes roughly 3 seconds for each ledger to basically come to a consensus. Well, it comes to a consensus quicker, but the speed at which the ledgers go through are once every 3 seconds. Cobalt is just a different mathematical algorithm in which that consensus is reached. So Ripple, wrote this algorithm. One of the guys at Ripple wrote this algorithm, and there's a whole PDF describing it. Goes into if it's going to load, goes into a whole load of maths, sort of proving it's how it works. It's quite an in-depth thing here. I certainly have not read it through word for word, I have to say. But in essence, Cobalt is a better consensus algorithm for various definitions of better. And one of the things it will allow is the transactions per second to increase to, I think, about the ledger taking one second to close rather than 3 seconds. So it would effectively increase the number of transactions per second by roughly 3 times, I think. Link that in the description. Which the PDF, on Cobalt. Sure, I'll put some links in for some of the other bits I've talked about, some of the sites I've shown on here. Melanie, it has gone really quickly. Thank you, but I suppose the good news with that being is that it means I actually have something to talk about next week. Otherwise, I would run out of things to say, and there'd be nothing there for next week. 45,000 transactions. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it will be very fast. So this is something that Ripple want to build. I'm not sure at what process they are in it. Some people say they're very close to implementing it. I don't think they are. I think they are closer to the beginning of actually implementing this than the end of actually implementing this. But as you can see, it has all been written up, and it has various mathematical proofs to prove that it does what it says on the tin, basically, in here. And it allows the validator nodes to be slightly more distributed than they are at the moment. You have to make sure each node has an overlapping number of validators, because if with the analogy I made about the courtroom and the witnesses, you have to make sure that everybody is asking an overlapping set of the witnesses. Because if you did ask two completely sets of different witnesses, then they could come back with two totally different sets of answers. And Cobalt is better at dealing with that situation, basically. So definitely in 2019, not this year. Yeah, probably unlikely this year. But the XRP ledger is fast enough as it is. It's whizzing away here. So here we go. Well, every ledger here, what's this? 8 transactions, 10 transactions. So that's every 3 seconds. This is updating. So we're getting something in the region of, say, 3 to 5 transactions a second going on at the moment. Well, as it currently stands, it can go to 1,500 transactions a second is what they've tested it to. So we're nowhere near capacity at the moment. We can scale much higher right now. So anyway, thank you very much. The next stream will be the same time next week. So Monday, 8 p.m. UK time, 9 p.m. UTC. And should be on the actual channel. I've got an actual channel for this. I will try and move this video over to there as well, and so it'll be on there. And so great, thank you very much. If I'm going to ask you, I'll put this over on the other channel. You can put any comments. If anybody has any comments or questions, you can put them on the comments on the other channel, the Cryptocurrency Explained channel, once I move it onto there. And then look for that channel rather than this personal one. So thanks very much, everyone, and see you next week.